So we've got a series of there's 12 meetings coming up around this collective body of work, and other than myself, I wouldn't expect anyone else to attend all 12. But the point of this exercise is to present what we've got in mind, and just to let people know what we've got in mind, but also to seek any input and any bright ideas that people have got about how we're intending to approach this. So for context, this collective eco-nomics platform, so we're building on 4 years of developing tools to support the Great Barrier Reef. So there's about 60 million a year goes through that. So collectively those tools are captured about 250 million worth of investment in reef catchments. So Jeff, this is just to give you some perspective about Victoria. So that covers nearly twice the size of Victoria. And what we're trying to do here is to develop some generalised solutions that can be applied more broadly rather than just a reef-based approach. And to support that, the Queensland Water Modelling Network have tipped in investment funding for this initial planning application project. And we've got a focused region or pilot region for the Southern Queensland landscapes. And Paul Webb here today is leading that side of things. So we're covering a reasonably big spatial area, but what we want to do is be as generalised as we can about this approach so that we can apply it even more broadly than that. So these series of little workshops will be about just making sure we've got most things covered, at least for these initial versions. So I want to kind of paint a little bit of a higher level picture to start with, I guess, as to what we're trying to do here and what our kind of vision and goal is with this collection of economics applications. So we want to support the growth of the natural resource management pie, trying to get it from where we are now, about $3 billion per year annually across Australia, to some larger number by delivering real additional and perpetual changes to the natural environment. And that little media release snippet thinks, I think it's time. So the challenge then to try and achieve that is to try and convince Federal Treasury that 20 billion invested in the natural environment is better value than 2 nuclear submarines, or to convince Twiggy or Gina that some of their 2 billion personal profit this year should go to offset the natural capital that was exploited to achieve it, or that Bill and Melinda Gates convince them that investing in Australia's natural capital is better than investing elsewhere because we've got a robust environmental accounting systems. And then the BHP shareholders convince them that a sustainable business model requires the offset of natural capital exploitation, and we've got a way to do that. So how do we get there? So NRO investment at the moment, it's mostly government. It's temporarily lumpy, just periodic grant rounds that come out. So how do you grow that pie and how do you keep the tap turned on? So initially a growing focus on accountable investment. So it helps grow the government funding and different initiatives like the Land Restoration Fund or the Natural Capital Fund, environmental offsets or reef credits. So that's just from a Queensland perspective, or federally as well. So reef investment and traditional regional body investment. But then the bigger game, I think, is about being able to provide the mechanism for industry, philanthropic and environmental offsets, vehicle for them to be able to invest in the natural environment. And so some little examples there. So the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, terrible acronym, but really like the basis of accounting for carbon and carbon reporting, being able to do that on natural capital use in the generation of wealth. So I'd kind of live partly in a bit of a rainbow unicorn world where all these things might happen, but there are things happening in the news. So, his Santos being accused of greenwashing, and ATSIC has confirmed that it's in the early stages of looking at other listed companies to make sure that they adequately report on their environmental credentials. And there's a lot going on in this space, and our contribution really as tool builders and environmental modelers is to produce tools to support this natural capital. So around a marketplace, impact reporting, investment planning, project capture. And these things are going to be simple and robust. They've got to be defendable, repeatable, and scalable. So with that in mind, we've got sort of 4 main areas of work in this economics platform: investment planning, project design and capture, impact reporting, and a marketplace. And if we think about these problems around the outside here and which parts of the collective platform that they'll interact with, many of them are interacting with sort of multiple components, if you like. So I won't read through all of those, but you can understand what we're shooting for here. So from industry-led to government-led to NRM body to philanthropic organisations to semi-retired agronomists who want a mechanism to be engaged in this process. So with those 4 areas of economics in mind, we'll line them out horizontally. So there's 4 main areas. So investment planning, and I've got a box around this. This is the first cat off the rank and the thing that we're going to be focused on over this next series of workshops. But it's fundamentally about coming up with portfolios of what to do and where to do it based on cost effectiveness, confidence in those outcomes, likely adoption potential, temporal response to the things that we care about, which are water quality, social, First Peoples, biodiversity and climate. And that's a high level catchment and sub-catchment level sort of investment planning and strategy. The next step across is the project design and capture. So it's a farm scale for being able to capture individual projects, have more confidence in the predicted outcome, be able to submit those projects for review and approval. Then we've got a marketplace. So it's about supporting existing marketplaces. So, for example, and the icons I've got at the bottom here are representations of where we've done this in the reef. So supporting the reef credits marketplace. So provide the tools that ultimately capture projects and approval and accounting to have confidence in that marketplace. And then the final thing on the right is about impact reporting. So being able to report by funder or by region or by benefit around each of these things. So think about how these things interact. So the first thing we're going to work on is this economics plan. So this is sub-catchment level investment planning. So then we need to transform that investment strategy into our designed projects. Those projects, once implemented, we want to be able to communicate what's been done or what's going to be done. And then we also want to be able to take those design projects to the marketplace and have the marketplace be able to sort of directly invest in projects sort of over and above the government-related grant release program. So let's think about the economics plan application first. So this is a sub-catchment level. That's a lumped modelling approach. And it's about getting rapid investment portfolio generation. And our audience here are investors. The users are investors, NRM bodies and local government authorities. And so the approach is to have a consistent approach across large spatial scales so that we've got the ability to share different actions. I'll talk about what actions are in a minute. So we've got a common understanding for investors across regions. So they've got a common approach for rapidly developing investment portfolios across different regions. And we propose to base this on what we've done for a tool called Reefonomics, a Great Barrier Reef related investment portfolio generation tool. It includes both quantitative and semi-qualitative measures. And those measures we're proposing, they're going to be fixed at the version level. So we'll get the initial version out there, effectively get a product in the marketplace, find out what's wrong with that and iterate on that process. So the idea is to get something up and usable as fast as we can. So more about this economics plan. So it's about being able to generate portfolios of the most cost-effective subset of what we've got so far is about 150 alternate actions. And those actions that we've captured, they represent agricultural practice improvement, improved grazing management practices, for example, direct interventions like riparian zone intervention activity, and then the associated support mechanism that goes along with that on-ground work, if you like. So the action along with the extension, or the on-ground work along with the extension activity of the support mechanism, represents the action. So far in the reef area, we've got sugarcane, banana, grains and cropping, grazing, streambank and gully management. In southeast Queensland, we've got microbial related activities as well. And we're keen to add avoided destruction type measures as well. That image you see on the right here is just a screenshot out of Reefonomics tool about being able to come up with portfolios based on different ways to prioritise those collective actions. So whether we're looking at constituents there, we're reducing sediment load, the response time. So some activities are quick, some take some time. So how do you compare those in a portfolio? There's some industry weightings to allow you to consider kind of economies of scale and coming up with the investment portfolio, and what we call in the reef space co-benefits. So even though they're primarily focused on water quality, there are secondary benefits which are considered as well in their portfolio generation. So what's novel about the economics plan? About being able to deal with multiple values to better reflect modern NRM. So it's not just a water quality story. So being able to simultaneously think about a portfolio that considers water quality, biodiversity, First Nations, social, economic and climate change. And some of those we can do better than others. And we deal with that by being able to have confidence. So we want to be able to display the confidence associated with the predicted outcomes. So what we want, the right way to describe it, we don't want the perfect to be the enemy of the good, if that makes sense. So we're making decisions right now about NRM investment that considers all those things. So we want a way to be able to represent those and represent them with some confidence around those likely predicted outcomes. We want to be able to show a temporal response as well. So not all activities give you an outcome overnight. So to be sort of realistic about what those responses might be, and also to consider the likelihood of adoption through time. So the greatest intervention activity has still got to be adopted by landholders. So we need to be able to represent that process, and that informs how you might come up with an investment portfolio. So that's really the first phase of this, is about developing economics plan. But I'll touch briefly on economics project because this is often confusing. It's fundamentally just a different level of scale. So when we get down to economics projects, so then capturing those individual projects, we're down at being able to represent things at a farm scale. So it's effectively a farm scale modelling exercise, and we can be very locally specific. So use the best available data at that local level to predict the outcomes. And you can see where there's screenshots along the bottom what we've done in the reef. So for these different industries, we don't have all industries covering all areas because it doesn't make sense. You don't grow sugarcane everywhere. So we've got these masks that represent where you can apply the industry or the action intervention. And our focus for the economics project will be on, firstly, existing methods. So from a grower perspective, it's using paddock modelling, principally how leaky, and agricultural commodities, sugarcane, banana, grain, horticulture, firstly, because we know how to do those, but also other horticulture, grazing, riparian management, gully management, and we've got to do some work on how to represent the biodiversity. That's a novel component to us here. Okay, so firstly, economics plan. So this catchment level sort of lump catchment model, and we're shooting for a beta version early next year, focused on the Southern Queensland landscapes pilot area. So the modelling's necessarily coarse, but the computation's fast and allows rapid iteration and workshopping to be able to come up with investment portfolios. Then we'll follow on with economics project. And because of the structure we've got for economics project, to be able to effectively add activities through time. So an initial beta mid next year, and that will grow over time as we develop more actions and implement those. So a fundamental kind of principle that we're building these things off is this concept of actions affect measures, which in turn represent the values that you care about. So, and in economics plan, the way that those actions affect the measures are relatively simple, computationally simple methods that are fast to deal with. And at the economics project level, the way that the actions affect the measures can be much more complicated, be a local farm scale water quality model or similar. So thinking more about actions, measures, and values. So for an example here, if the action is cultural burning, so in our actions, we've got about 150 different actions here, and we need to know what the available area to do each of these actions is. That's kind of part of the underlying data set that we drive. And then the impact of that action on the measure, we've got some quantitative representation. So an efficacy, which is a proportional change, a yield base, so it's a change per unit area, and or a fixed change, such as when you do a point source intervention that has a fixed known change. And for our qualitative, we use a Likert scale. So you'll be familiar with these. In this case, it's a 7-point scale from in the middle, no change, to a little bit better, a lot better, and heaps better, and the reverse the other way, to represent those things that we don't have good quantitative representation. Under the measures area, so we need effectively a base condition to report a change from, and fundamentally we need to be able to capture actions that are effectively avoided impact. And we've done this poorly in the past, and I'm speaking more generally about water quality modelling or environmental modelling. We can predict the benefit if we plant trees, but we don't demonstrate the benefit of protecting high quality assets. So in order to do that, we need to be able to represent a business as usual case, so represent what the likely decline is going to be in the absence of those avoided actions. And then ultimately, we've got to combine these things up to produce a reportable interface around the values. So take that a step further, so that if we've got an action of cultural burning, these are our initial measures that we're trying to quantify. The darker ones at the top there are the ones that we reckon we can do a quantitative representation of, and the ones in the lighter grey at the bottom, in the middle, ones that we can rely on we plan to rely on a Likert scale, sort of semi-qualitative approach to represent the likely change. So any given action impacts on multiple measures, and then those measures combine up to give you an overall kind of value story. So here's where we are at the moment. So our values over on the left there, and we're keen for your input as to whether we've captured enough to be useful. There's always more things that you can add, but it's just about what's the minimum set, if you like. And what we'd probably like to try and avoid is an exercise in autocorrelation where we have loads of related things. So try and keep these as separate as we can. And we've got the measures and how they might be affected. So The subsequent workshops, what we'll largely be doing is teasing out each of these elements and about what's the appropriate way to represent them and what's the appropriate data to drive those things. But that's kind of the base summary for now. So coming up for these next 11 workshops, so we've got one on Wednesday. It's really just a background to the RIC tools, where we've done this before, but it's quite a specific use case, but that'll help provide some context to where we're coming from, and you'll be able to see why we're thinking the way we're thinking, if you like. And then later this week, actions and measures and values, so looking at collections of different actions and so on and so forth. So anyone's welcome to join any of these meetings at any stage for input. I'd totally appreciate any input. But I'll do as I will today. I'll record this part of the presentation and I'll post it up on a website, eco-nomics.net.au, and we'll stick it on the tutorials page so that they can exist there as kind of a record of what this discussion's been about.